Tonight, let us wander gently, without hurry, and certainly without any dramatic plot developments, into the quiet, silk-wrapped world of a concubine in feudal Japan. Not the kind you read about in scandalous court records or whispered poems. No, this is the daily, dutiful kind, the sort of concubine who knew 30 ways to fold a sash and exactly how loud to cough when passing her lord's chamber. Before we begin, you may wish to dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a small fan if you have one. Nothing aggressive, just something that hums a little like a faraway stream or a nearby contemplative mosquito. Take a breath. Loosen your shoulders. And if your blanket is tucked just right, we may begin. You do not wake with a start. That would be improper. You wake slowly, as if your spirit needs gentle coaxing to return from the dream world. The light filtering through the rice paper walls is grayish, undecided, between night and morning. This hour is sometimes called the hour of the pale lantern, though no one remembers why. Possibly because lanterns were still lit, but mostly unnecessary. Or possibly because someone once said it, and no one dared correct them. Your futon lies on the polished wood floor of your private chamber, which is not entirely private, as it shares a wall with the plum blossom room, where Lady Roku plays her koto very badly at dawn. The sliding doors are painted with scenes of cranes who appear to be mid-argument. Above the ceiling is made of lacquered cedar beams, the kind that creak occasionally, not from ghosts, but from age and mild resentment. You sit up slowly. No sudden movements. The hairdresser does not appreciate when you stretch too vigorously. It undoes the entire back section of her masterpiece. Your hair, which yesterday was coaxed into a shape reminiscent of an ambitious yam, is now held in place by hope tradition, and several ornamental pins sharp enough to qualify as weapons under certain laws. Your first act of the day is not to speak, nor to wash, but to listen. The garden outside your chamber murmurs with distant bamboo leaves and the muffled splash of a carp who has once again mistaken his own tail for something provocative. From the walkway, you hear the slippers of the morning attendant shuffling with practiced apathy. She delivers the ceremonial basin of water and a towel the texture of dried algae. This is not an insult. In fact, it's tradition. You cleanse your face in silence as the handbook recommends. You do not gargle. It is considered unnecessarily enthusiastic. The water is tepid, which is culturally neutral. Dressing in the Heian tradition is not an act of personal expression. It is a structured performance. Part ballet, part origami, and mostly patience. Your kimono today is a subdued green, embroidered with 3 chrysanthemums and 1 undecided pine. Each layer must be folded precisely to show just the right sliver of color at the collar and sleeves, like a geological cross-section of your aesthetic restraint. The underrobe is tied with a cord that feels like it was woven from judgment and regret. The outer robe is heavier, the kind that reminds your shoulders who's in charge. Once dressed, you are no longer a person. You are a curated vision of seasonal harmony. You also cannot bend at the waist for the next several hours, which means anything dropped is now the responsibility of someone else. You sip a modest cup of barley tea, which tastes like polite disappointment. The tea is not meant to excite. It is meant to prepare your inner self for a day of not being particularly remarkable. Your hairdresser, O Natsu, enters quietly. She does not speak unless spoken to, which is convenient because you are not in the mood for conversation. You both understand that this is a sacred hour of concentration, balancing one's top knot while silently judging yesterday's hairline decisions. Today's style requires 4 pins and a comb that looks ceremonial, but is actually excellent at scratching precisely the one part of your scalp that always itches. When she finishes, she bows and leaves without comment. This means it is a good enough hair day, which is the highest compliment you will receive before sunset. Your fellow concubines begin to stir in their chambers, murmuring greetings that are friendly but not warm. The hierarchy of affection in this household is subtle and complex. You like Lady Mai, but not when she wins poetry contests. You are neutral about Lady Iko, except when she breathes loudly. And as for Lady Kana, you respect her position, fear her influence, and suspect she has a secret stash of better tea. You are not summoned today. This is a small relief. When you are summoned, you must compose your face into an expression of serene charm while your feet go numb beneath you in a kneeling pose so precise it is used to calibrate spirit levels. Today, instead, you tend to your inkstone and paper, write a few polite haiku about koi and clouds, and organize your correspondence in the order of social danger. There is a message from your cousin in Kyoto, still unmarried, still enthusiastic about incense. You make a note to reply with news that is interesting, but not too interesting. You do not want to appear immodest, or worse, like someone who enjoys her own life. Just before midday, a servant delivers a tray of rice, pickles, and dried sardines that appear to be judging you. The rice is warm, the pickles are sour, and the sardines are present. You eat in measured silence, grateful for the routine. This is the part of the day when time slows down to the pace of falling dust. And honestly, you prefer it that way. After the midday tray is cleared, with the efficiency of someone who has done it 1,000 times and plans to do it 1,000 more, you rise, not quickly, not dramatically, just steadily, like steam lifting off a cooling tea bowl. Afternoon in the residence is a strange kind of quiet, not silent, but filled with the deliberate sounds of those trying very hard not to disturb the peace while still appearing productive. You are expected to be somewhere doing something, preferably both, but no one will tell you exactly where or what, because the true skill of a concubine is knowing without being told. So you make your way to the garden path, careful that your footsteps are soft enough to imply thoughtfulness, but audible enough to confirm your presence. There is no room in this life for sudden entrances. Your sandals, which are too narrow for comfort and too decorative for practicality, whisper along the stones with the kind of restraint typically reserved for diplomacy or very formal apologies. The corridor you pass through is lined with sliding doors, each painted with different scenes. One shows herons fishing in a river that always seems colder than the room itself. Another displays a pine tree bent under imaginary snow, and your personal favorite, the one with the fox, who looks like he knows something, but will never tell. These images do not change, but your mood changes around them, which is enough. In the outer garden, the stones are still warm from the sun, though it hides now behind a polite veil of cloud. The chrysanthemums are beginning to wilt, not in a dramatic collapse, but in that soft, resigned way plants have when they know their time is up and have decided not to cause a fuss about it. You are joined at a respectful distance by Lady Mai, who nods and then proceeds to ignore you completely while adjusting the angle of her parasol. It is the kind of interaction that would feel rude in any other context. But here it is practically affectionate. You sit beside the stone basin and fold your hands neatly in your lap, observing nothing in particular. This is the art of passive poise, cultivated over years to seem entirely absorbed in the moment, while remaining alert to every petal that falls and every whisper that drifts through the lattice screens. After what might be half an hour or 2 centuries, depending on one's perspective, the calligraphy master arrives. He is punctual to the minute, as always, and wears the kind of mustache that suggests strong opinions about ink. You bow, he bows lower. You insist he rise. First, he insists again, and eventually you both stand upright, having exhausted the ritual without exchanging a single unnecessary word. This lesson is not about learning to write, which you already know how to do. It is about refining the angle of each stroke until it looks effortless. It is about holding the brush like it contains the weight of the season, not just the ink. Today, the practice poem involves chrysanthemums, again, though you suspect that's just because the teacher is fond of their shape. You complete your verse in silence, the brush gliding with minimal resistance. He nods once, which is the closest thing to praise you will receive this week. After he leaves, you remain seated, letting the poem dry beside you on the mat. The wind lifts one corner briefly before dropping it again, as if to say it considered reading your thoughts, but changed its mind. A little later, a minor attendant appears with a tray of silks. Today's activity is embroidery, which is like calligraphy, but slower, and with more opportunities to bleed. The thread is dyed with crushed flower petals and something mysteriously labeled as mountain pigment, though no one has ever confirmed what mountain or what part of it. You select a pale blue and begin stitching a wave pattern onto the edge of a ceremonial handkerchief. It will be gifted to someone you will probably never meet. That's the thing about gifts in the court. They are rarely personal, often symbolic, and always important to someone else. The afternoon drifts onward. A flute begins playing in the distance, its tune vaguely familiar, possibly the same melody you heard last week, or one that merely resembles it closely enough to pass. You continue sewing. One of the younger attendants stops to refill the ink pot nearby and leaves behind a faint smell of plum wine. You make a mental note not to mention it. Just as the shadows begin to lengthen, a small folded note arrives on a lacquered tray. It is not addressed to you directly, but the pattern of the fold suggests it is meant for your eyes. The message is brief, almost cryptic. It mentions the upcoming festival and something about arrangements for the lantern procession. You are not asked to do anything explicitly, but there is just enough ambiguity to suggest that you should probably be somewhere speaking to someone before sunset. This is how most decisions are made here, through implication folding patterns and knowing glances from people whose names you've never been told. You nod to the attendant, who bows as if she's just delivered news of national importance, and slips away. You place the note in your sleeve, careful not to crease it. Evening is approaching. Soon the lamps will be lit, the outer halls swept again, and the layers of silence will shift into their twilight arrangement. But before that happens, there is still time for one more walk through the corridor. One more glance at the fox painting, and perhaps a visit to the corridor where the musicians practice just to listen, not to interfere. of course, just to be nearby, in case. The corridor leading toward the musician's practice space smells faintly of sandalwood and roasted chestnuts, a combination that implies someone has been both meditating and mildly snacking nearby, possibly at the same time. You glide past the screen that separates the inner chambers from the main courtyard, your sleeves just brushing the tatami at the perfect height for quiet elegance. The note tucked in your sleeve remains unopened again, though you read it 3 times earlier. It's not that you don't understand it. It's that the less you act on it directly, the more sophisticated your response appears. A concubine must master the art of the indirect solution, the kind where no one ever sees you fix the problem, but somehow the issue no longer exists. Outside, the light has softened into that golden hue, which makes everything, even the moss on the stepping stones, appear more dignified than it deserves. A pair of turtle doves are pecking at something invisible near the koi pond, their movements slow and contemplative, as if they too are struggling to interpret a vague message about the lantern procession. You pause just beyond the threshold of the musician's veranda, where a koto player is practicing in a seated position so rigid it could serve as architectural support. She notices you, of course, but pretends not to. You respond in kind. The piece she plays is one of those meandering, seasonal compositions that begins without fanfare and ends without resolution, a melody designed to imply deep thought, but cause none. It washes over you like warm broth, nourishing, inoffensive, and unlikely to be remembered. There is movement to your right. Lady Iko appears, cradling a box of embroidered cloths and wearing an expression of mild importance. Her presence in this wing at this hour is not unusual, but her direction of travel is telling. She's heading toward the garden lanterns. That can only mean one thing. The message involved her too, which makes your timing either deliberate or exquisitely coincidental. She sees you, offers the smallest incline of her head, and continues walking. You fall in behind her, not quite companionably, not quite alone. The stone path through the southern courtyard crunches gently beneath your soles, a reminder that autumn is shedding its skin, one leaf at a time. The trees here are well behaved. Their colors change on schedule, and their branches rarely do anything dramatic. By the time you reach the lantern storage alcove, the light has shifted enough to require one. A young page arrives, just in time, as they always do, with a flint, a taper, and a face too carefully blank to be purely innocent. You allow him to light the first lantern, then carry it yourself, arms level, expression composed. The lantern is round and simple, made of paper, thin enough to ripple with your breath, and painted with the household crest in a manner just slightly off-center, which someone should fix, but no one will. Lady Iko selects a second lantern, hers slightly larger, with golden flecks embedded in the paper that catch the light like gossip. No one speaks as you both proceed through the corridor toward the east veranda. This part of the procession, the unofficial part, is not about spectacle. It is about preparation and presence. Later, others will walk the same route in silk and ceremony. For now, it is enough to be seen by the right people at the right time, ideally while doing something practical that appears slightly ceremonial. The hallway you pass through is narrow, with a low ceiling and tall shadows that stretch like polite fingers across the floorboards. A passing maid bows deeply, almost overbalancing, before realizing neither of you expects acknowledgement. Your lantern sways in rhythm, with your steps casting a trembling halo that makes even the peeling lacquer on the baseboards seem romantic. You arrive at the edge of the eastern terrace, where the view opens toward the lower pond. The gardeners have just finished raking the gravel into those contemplative spirals that look like they took hours, and probably did. Lady Iko places her lantern onto a low wooden stand, adjusts it by half an inch, then does not move again. You place yours beside it. Neither of you say anything. It is the kind of silence that is not empty, but full of observation, calculation, and just the faintest hint of shared fatigue. A soft bell rings from somewhere deeper within the residence, signaling the hour before formal assembly. You nod to Lady Iko just once and turn away. She does not follow. This is not unusual. The paths of concubines often cross for a moment, then diverge like streams, unsure of their own destination. You retrace your steps through the courtyard, back into the cooler shadows of the inner walkway. Somewhere nearby, a pair of attendants are arranging fresh reeds by the entrance to the poetry alcove, their movements synchronized like a ritual dance no one ever taught them aloud. The scent of incense drifts around the corner, a light floral blend, possibly chrysanthemum again, or maybe peony. It's hard to tell. In the distance, you hear someone laughing, high-pitched, probably Lady Roku, who laughs like a falling spoon hitting porcelain. It's not an unkind sound, just persistent. You return to your chamber, briefly long enough to retrieve the thin, lacquered box that contains your seasonal offering, a fan painted with cloud patterns, and a small poem written in cursive so soft it almost vanishes when you look too directly at it. This fan is not meant to be used. It is meant to be seen, then set aside, then perhaps remembered days later as something thoughtful. With the fan tucked under your arm, you walk westward, past the pillar, with the faint crack that has been painted over 5 times and still shows through. The sky outside has now slipped into lavender tones, and the shadows of the roof tiles look longer than the walkway itself. A crow calls from a tree somewhere overhead, low and matter-of-fact, as if reminding you that sunset does not wait for proper etiquette. At the end of the corridor, you pause, adjust your sleeves, and prepare to enter the lantern court just as the evening candles are being lit. You step into the lantern court just as the candlelighters begin their methodical rounds, moving from post to post with the quiet reverence of monks and the efficiency of people who have done this 100 times and plan to do it 100 more. The lanterns themselves are arranged in deliberate asymmetry, an aesthetic choice intended to suggest natural randomness, though it takes hours to achieve. Each is painted with scenes from poetry, cranes rising from reeds, waves, curling with dignified force, a lone pine that seems to sigh with the weight of unexpressed emotion. You walk slowly, matching your breath to the rhythm of the glowing paper forms, careful not to cast a shadow that would disrupt their symmetry. The fan you carry is now cradled in both hands, as if it were a delicate truth, not yet ready to be spoken. It is no longer about the fan, of course. It is about the gesture, the moment of offering, and the impression it might leave on the recipient, who may or may not even remember your name. You pass beneath the covered walkway that borders the western koi pond. The water is still mirroring the lantern light in shimmers so faint they feel like secrets. A frog makes a brief, indecisive noise somewhere nearby before returning to whatever quiet thinking frogs do. Ahead, you spot a small gathering forming beneath the plum arbor. A few ladies of the inner circle are already seated, their faces composed, their voices soft enough to imply intimacy, but just loud enough to carry a hint of importance. They are sipping tea that is served not for refreshment, but as a ceremonial punctuation mark between segments of evening. You join the perimeter of the gathering, bowing at the appropriate angle, and taking your place among the non-vocal participants, those who are present not to speak, but to be seen listening, which in this setting is a conversational position of great value. Someone is reciting a recent tanka, composed, it seems, in response to the rustle of pampas grass after a storm. It is competently written, slightly overlong, and filled with the kind of melancholy observations that suggest the poet has not recently been summoned to the inner chambers. You murmur polite appreciation with the others, allowing the silence that follows to stretch just long enough to imply deep reflection, but not so long that it invites critique. Your fan, still unopened, now rests gently across your lap, a silent participant in the evening's unfolding mood. The official wife appears, then announced not by a fanfare or flourish, but by the simple fact that all conversation lowers by half a register. Her presence alters the air in a way no lantern can. She wears layered silk in pale lavender and carries a posture that suggests both elegance and bone-deep fatigue. She acknowledges the gathered ladies with a serene nod, and then turns slightly, just enough to suggest she has seen you, though not so much as to require a response. This is good. You would rather not respond. Attention from her is both an honor and a burden, and you already have enough of both. The evening continues with a slow exchange of fan poems and observations about the weather that are not really about the weather. Someone remarks on the early falling of the maple leaves, which is quickly interpreted as a metaphor for declining favor. Someone else counters with an optimistic note about the resilience of chrysanthemums. You contribute nothing, which is often the wisest choice. Instead, you remain present, aligned with the lanterns, part of the fabric of the moment, but not embroidered into its center. A servant approaches, discreetly, bearing a new tray of tea and a folded message that is placed beside you without a word. This time, the message is addressed directly. Your name written in a hand that is precise and economical, almost aggressively polite. You do not open it immediately. That would be unseemly. Instead, you acknowledge its presence with a fractional nod and allow it to rest beside your fan like two sides of an unplayed game. When the tea is served again, you accept the cup with your left hand sip only once, and then set it down with the measured grace of someone who knows they are being observed, but has chosen to appear unaware. Eventually, the official wife rises, signaling the soft unraveling of the evening. The other ladies begin their departures each with a variation of the same farewell, subdued, respectful, tinged with floral imagery. You follow after a polite interval, gathering your fan and message with a calm that belies the curiosity beginning to tap gently at your composure. The walk back through the inner corridors is even quieter now, lit only by the final rounds of candlelight and the soft rustle of robes brushing against reed mats. The household feels suspended, neither awake nor asleep, just breathing quietly in anticipation of whatever comes next. You reach your chamber, slide the door open without sound, and step inside where the shadows stretch long across the floor. You sit slowly, knees folding beneath you, with the ease of habit and the mild resistance of silk. At last, you unfold the message. The paper is thick, scented, faintly with something woody, and obscure. The contents are brief, just a sentence, no more. A request not urgent, but certainly not optional. The language is careful, deferential, yet unmistakably direct. You are to prepare a poem by dawn on the theme of waiting. No further instructions. No clarification on the occasion. No indication of who precisely issued the request, though you can guess or pretend not to. You set the paper down and gaze at the corner of the room where the light from the garden lantern filters in through the screen, casting the shape of a willow leaf that doesn't exist outside your imagination. You reach for your brush. The inkstone is ready. The fan lies nearby, no longer needed, but not quite forgotten. Outside, somewhere near the northern eaves, a wind chime stirs softly, as if clearing its throat before the brush rests between your fingers, like a small sleeping bird, warm from the touch of your palm and the weight of centuries of expectation. The inkstone, carefully prepared earlier by an attendant who knows better than to chatter, sits beside you in obedient stillness. The scent of ground ink, earthy, faintly bitter, has settled around you like an invisible shawl. It is not unpleasant. It merely insists upon your attention, as all proper ink should. The hour is neither late nor early. It hovers, as everything does in this place, between definitions. The lantern light from the garden now barely reaches the edge of your chamber, casting its glow onto a single square of tatami where dust floats in slow, dignified spirals. You do not rush. This poem, like all such requests, is not merely a matter of writing. It is a negotiation between presence and restraint, emotion and etiquette. You are to compose on the theme of waiting, but not your waiting. That would be too direct. This must be a reflection of waiting itself, of the concept, as it floats through the lives of all who reside here. The concubines, the servants, the carp in the pond, who await overfeeding the sleeves of your robe, that wait to be refolded properly every morning. You wet the brush with a measured dip and test the bristles with one graceful flick against the rim of the inkstone. The paper before you is pale, ivory smooth, and uncreased, the kind reserved for moments that will be archived, perhaps read aloud, perhaps misinterpreted beautifully in the future. The first stroke forms the character for pause, which feels both bold and too obvious, but you allow it. Sometimes the best hiding place is in plain view. The second line references the sound of footsteps on a corridor when one is not expected. You leave the third line blank for now. In poetry especially, court poetry, absence often carries more weight than elaboration. You rise briefly, walk to the edge of the paper door, and slide it open, no more than the width of your hand. The air is cool, tinged with pine, and something sweet, possibly, from the plum wine left out earlier, or perhaps just memory, lingering in the wood. You look out across the courtyard. It is empty, but not void. A lantern still flickers by the far gate, though you suspect it should have been extinguished an hour ago. Perhaps someone forgot. Perhaps someone remembered and chose not to. Returning to the paper, you sit again, legs folding beneath you, with the slow creak of silk and bone. You complete the third line, a metaphor involving a reed bending slightly toward a shadow that is not quite its own. It's the kind of line that sounds meaningful, but offers no foothold for analysis, which is, of course, the point. The final line comes quickly, surprising even you. A single image of a robe folded and left untouched beside an unopened door. You look at the words. They do not feel like yours. And that is exactly what they should feel like. You blot the ink gently, then roll the paper with practiced care, binding it with a thin silk ribbon, the color of oxidized copper. It is not beautiful, which makes it memorable. You place the scroll beside your pillow, where it will be retrieved before dawn. The delivery will happen while you sleep, or rather, while you lie still, with your eyes closed, which is often close enough. You extinguish the candle yourself, shielding the flame with a cupped hand and breathing gently over it, like offering a secret to the dark. The ember flickers, gasps, and vanishes. Silence wraps the room. But silence here is never absolute. You hear the faint pop of a bamboo slat settling, a cough from a distant chamber, the gentle, inexplicable thud of something soft landing where it shouldn't be. The palace has its own heartbeat, irregular and stubborn, like an old cat who refuses to move even when someone lays down a mat. You lie back, though sleep does not immediately follow. Your gaze drifts upward to the wooden beams above their surface, darkened with smoke, and time, their pattern as familiar as the back of your hand. You count them, though you know the number already. Counting is not for discovery. It is for reassurance. Somewhere beyond the beams, beyond the roof, beyond even the tall cypress trees that ring the estate like polite guards who've forgotten their original orders, a breeze begins to rise. It brushes against the outer shutters and rustles the paper like a breath between syllables. You turn your head slightly toward the sound, imagining it might carry the response to your poem, perhaps a compliment, perhaps a question, more likely, an additional task disguised as praise. Your eyes close, not fully, just enough to soften the room. The ink on your fingers has dried, leaving faint marks on your sleeve where you wiped them absent-mindedly. You will explain it tomorrow, with a tilt of your head and a vague comment about artistic urgency. It will be accepted without further inquiry. The scroll remains beside your pillow, untouched, but no longer unnoticed. The hour continues to hold its breath. Outside, the lantern by the far gate winks once in the wind. Then, when the light returns, it does not burst through the room with drama or urgency. It seeps in a gradual grayness that nudges the outlines of objects into view without bothering to ask your permission. Your eyes are open before you realize you are awake, and your body has remained still long enough that the blanket's edge has creased itself into the shape of your shoulder. You do not stretch. That would break the spell. Instead, you lie for another moment, listening for signs of retrieval. The scroll beside your pillow is gone. You didn't hear them enter, of course. That would be uncivilized. The retrieval is always silent, part ceremony, part mild vanishing act. Someone somewhere is now walking down a corridor with your poem held like a tray of delicate confections ready to be delivered, read, and judged, possibly all at once. You rise slowly, letting the blanket fold in on itself without correction. The floor is cold beneath your feet, not unpleasantly, so more like a reminder that the world continues with or without your consent. The air smells faintly of ink sandalwood and wet stone, the last being a sign that it rained during the night, or at least threatened to. You wash your face in the small basin by the doorway, the water cool enough to clarify your thoughts, but not so cold as to inspire regret. There's a small mark of ink still on your cheekbone, visible only if someone looks directly. You decide not to remove it. Let them wonder if it's accident or aesthetic. Dressing for the morning takes less time than dressing for an appearance. Today's robes are simpler, layered, but unembellished in tones of pale jade and rice paper. They signal humility, or at least the illusion of it, which is useful in the hours after one has submitted poetry. You leave your chamber, with quiet steps nodding once to the page posted near the end of the walkway. His expression remains a studied blank, but his slight repositioning of the broom in his hand confirms he has already been informed of your schedule. You appreciate this. Words before breakfast are rarely helpful. The corridor stretches eastward, its wood still dark from the night's moisture. Each floorboard has its own personality. Some creak apologetically, others mutter disapproval with every step. You know them all by now, and your pace adjusts accordingly. Outside the paper windows, The sky shifts between pearl and slate, undecided on how committed it wants to be to sunrise. A breeze slides through the slats near the ceiling, carrying with it the scent of pine needles and damp moss. Somewhere nearby, a bamboo pipe clicks as it tips water rhythmically into a stone basin. The sound is absurdly dignified. You reach the scriptorium before the others. It is not a room you often visit this early, but the scroll must have passed through here, copied, noted, recorded in one of the thick ledgers that rest on low, lacquered shelves. The room itself is clean spare and infused with a kind of whispered authority. The low table at the center is unoccupied, though there are signs of recent use, a slightly damp cloth folded beside the inkwell, a brush still drying against a stone. On the far wall, a scroll rack holds fresh copies awaiting distribution. One bears your seal. You approach, lift it carefully, and unfurl just enough to see the opening line. It has been transcribed precisely without embellishment or error. This is both flattering and disappointing. You were hoping, perhaps, for some subtle change, a correction, a compliment disguised as a revision. But no, it is exactly as you wrote it. You roll it closed again and place it back on the rack. The page you passed earlier now appears behind you, bearing a fresh towel and a small lacquered tray with 2 rice balls and a pickled plum. You had not asked for breakfast, but it has arrived, which means someone requested it on your behalf. You thank him with a look, and he vanishes in that efficient, soundless way that makes you suspect pages have access to alternate exits the rest of you are not told about. Sitting on the edge of the veranda, you eat 1 rice ball, slowly, letting the steam curl upward as if it might carry your thoughts with it. The plum is sharp, assertive, a welcome interruption to the otherwise muted palate of the morning. You leave the 2nd rice ball untouched. Someone else will likely find it, wonder who left it behind, and invent a story more interesting than the truth. As you rise, a familiar voice drifts in from the hallway. Lady Roku discussing incense again, this time, with the authority of someone who once read half a scroll on the subject. You remain behind the screen until she passes her footsteps, light and purposeful, her sleeves rustling with narrative intent. She does not see you. You do not intend to be seen. Once the hallway clears, you step back into the corridor, now drier than before, though still echoing faintly with the hush of dawn. You head north, toward the meditation garden, a place not known for visitors at this hour. It is where thoughts are supposed to slow, where gravel patterns are not merely aesthetic, but suggest paths for the eye and the mind. You reach the gate, unlatch it with care, and enter. The garden is exactly as expected. Raked precise, a little too serene. The rocks have not moved, but they give the impression they might someday, when no one is watching. You kneel near the largest stone, flat-topped, streaked with lichen, and gaze not at the stone, but at the space around it. This is a practice, not a profound one, but one that passes the time between obligations. You remain there until the light finally decides to become day. And just as you begin to rise, brushing the gravel dust from your sleeves, you hear it, a soft footstep behind you. Deliberate, neither servant nor equal, but someone who expects to be noticed. You do not turn immediately. That would be too eager. Instead, you adjust the fall of your robe, lift your chin slightly, and wait for them to speak. The footsteps behind you stop just short of the raked path, as if the speaker respects the invisible line between the world of ordinary affairs and the cultivated silence of stones. You keep your eyes steady on the garden, not because you are ignoring them, but because you are allowing them the dignity of their pause. After all, to interrupt solitude is no small act. It must be done gently, like placing a teacup on a surface without a sound. Your composition. The voice begins male, young, but ironed with the kind of practiced neutrality that implies training, or nerves, or both, was received with interest. Interest is a word that carries a wide range of meanings in the court. It could imply approval, concern, or a vague intention to mention it again someday. You incline your head slightly, still kneeling, acknowledging, without encouraging elaboration. I was asked. He continues to thank you. Personally, that changes things slightly. It suggests your poem was not merely logged or shuffled along to the collection clerk with the others, but singled out, delivered, perhaps even read aloud, which is always a risk, especially if someone chooses a poor moment in the afternoon, or if their voice cracks on the third line. You turn now slowly enough to take in the figure behind you without seeming startled. The young man is unfamiliar, not a regular attendant, not one of the garden staff, and certainly not a member of the poetic circle that meets under the plum arbor with more ambition than talent. He wears a robe of understated blue, belted higher than usual, which either means he is from another household or simply prefers his garments tight. He holds nothing in his hands. This makes him less threatening and more intriguing. The request came from above, he adds, though I was not told how far. This is a classic phrase among messengers who carry something delicate, but don't want to be caught holding it when the wind shifts. You rise, brushing off the faint dust from your sleeves, and thank him with a nod. He bows in return, respectfully deep, and then glances to the raked gravel with a look that suggests he is aware of its significance, but unsure of its function. "Do I deliver a reply?" he asks, not expectantly, almost hopefully. You consider. A reply to what exactly? The message was no more than a formal acknowledgement, padded in silk and implication. But perhaps it's not the words that require reply. Perhaps it is the act of noticing. You turn back to the garden for a moment, eyes following the faint trail of yesterday's rake lines still visible under the morning dew. Then return your gaze to the young man. Only this you say, reaching into your sleeve to remove a small slip of folded paper, blank but creased in a very particular way. He takes it without unfolding as he should, and bows again deeper this time, as if the paper now weighs more than it did a moment ago. He departs quietly, his footsteps memorizing the stone pattern beneath him, in case he is asked later where exactly he stood. You watch until the curve of the path swallows him. Then you remain a while longer in the garden, not because you expect anything more to happen, but because movement too soon would appear reactionary. When you do leave, it is by the northern path, the one lined with sleeping cedar and the occasional fox print in the mud. You pass two maids carrying bundles of cloth for the dye house, their conversation light, peppered with half-stifled laughter that fades respectfully as you approach. One bows more deeply than necessary, perhaps recognizing you, perhaps not. It doesn't matter. Recognition here is as fluid as the ink in last night's brush. At the edge of the corridor, a servant waits not one of yours, but clearly dispatched from someone of rank. She carries a tray with two covered dishes and a note tucked beneath a plum blossom. This is breakfast again, which is unexpected. You already ate, but refusing it would be noted, and questioning it would be worse. You accept the tray, thank her, in the measured tone expected of your position, and step into the shade of the side chamber, just off the main hall. It is a room used for nothing in particular, which makes it perfect. You set the tray down on the low table, remove the blossom carefully, and slide the note free. It is short, an invitation of sorts, a private reading. No time stated, no signature, just a line of poetry yours, followed by the kanji for listen. The implication is clear. Someone wants to speak to you, but not officially. This is both an honor and a risk, depending on who else notices. You unwrap the dishes while your thoughts adjust themselves. One holds soft egg custard with a splash of citrus broth. The other, small dried fish, lacquered in something sweet. Neither dish is common, and both suggest someone intends to make a gesture of subtle praise. You taste the custard. It is excellent absurdly, so the kind of flavor that lingers longer than the meal itself. Outside the chamber, the shadows have shifted from vertical to diagonal, signaling that the morning has begun its slow descent toward noon. Somewhere a bell chimes, once highlight the signal that the western veranda is open for leisure. It is not a place you are often summoned, but it is a place one might be found, especially if one is meant to be found. You fold the note, tuck it back beneath the blossom, and replace the cover on the tray. Then, without haste, you rise. The corridor awaits full of polished echoes and watchful silence. Your step are careful composed, the way one walks when one knows they are being counted. The fan at your hip taps softly against your robe as you turn toward the west wing, the message unspoken, but clearly underway. The west wing breathes differently than the others. Its corridors are wider, but lined with more paper screens than doors, and the light filters in sideways, brushing everything in a faint shade of honey and deliberate calm. You have passed through this wing before, but always in transit, never as your destination. Today feels different, though nothing overtly announces it. There are no guards, no musicians tuning strings, no ladies preparing to receive guests. Just the hum of the quiet architecture around you, as if the walls themselves have read the note tucked in your sleeve and chosen to make room for the implications. The soles of your feet make that familiar padded sound against the polished floor. Not quite silent, not quite disruptive. Ahead, a thin curtain of gauze marks the border between formality and suggestion. It sways slightly, though there is no wind. A servant stands beside it, young, alert, and almost visibly trying not to notice you. His hands are folded in front of him, and his eyes rest on the middle distance in that carefully trained way that suggests he could describe you in perfect detail later if asked, but would swear he never saw you at all. You stop a few paces before the curtain, and he bows just enough to confirm you are in the right place without acknowledging why. No names are spoken, no explanations offered. This is again the correct way. You wait. Not long, just long enough for it to feel deliberate. Then the servant lifts the edge of the gauze and gestures you forward. With a movement so practiced, it looks accidental. The room beyond is dim, not from lack of light, but from excess discretion. A few lanterns have been lit, their glow mellow and low to the floor, their presence more aesthetic than functional. The walls are lined with hanging scrolls, ink landscapes, poems, perhaps even calligraphic prayers. None of them are recent, and none are positioned high enough to require admiration. A single cushion sits in the middle of the room, beside a short table bearing 2 cups and a pot that may or may not contain tea. You approach, sit, with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being watched, even when alone, and wait without adjusting your sleeves. That part is important. Adjusting sleeves implies nervousness, and nervousness implies attachment. You are not attached, not yet. Footsteps, softer than your own, slower, measured like rain hitting old stone. The figure enters without announcement as expected. His robe is darker than yours, deep gray with an undertone of blue that shifts with the light. He sits across from you, unhurried, not because he wishes to prolong the moment, but because he understands there is power in not rushing toward anything. You do not bow, not fully. You incline your head, and he returns the gesture with precisely the same depth, which could mean respect equality or deliberate ambiguity. The teapot is lifted, poured 2 cups, filled all without speech. The tea is warm, but unperfumed, the sort one drinks while listening carefully. You do not sip immediately. Instead, you glance down at the pattern of the mat between you. It is worn slightly frayed at the edges, not recently replaced. This suggests familiarity, not neglect. Your poem, he says, and you notice how his voice does not rise at the end of the phrase. It is not a question, merely a declaration. It was still. He doesn't clarify further. Still as in unmoving, still as in peaceful, or still as in unresolved. You do not ask. Instead, you reply with equal brevity. Stillness waits longer than motion. This is not a clever statement, but it sounds like one which is often more valuable. He nods, takes a sip of his tea, and studies you, not with the hunger of youth or the calculation of court politics, but with something slower, more geological, as if trying to understand how you formed. A silence settles between you, textured, but not uncomfortable. It is the kind of pause where words are optional and presence does most of the work. When he speaks again, it is not about the poem, but about the garden. The plum trees are late this year. You nod once. They're waiting for the right kind of silence. This pleases him, though he hides it well. A slight upward shift at the corner of his mouth quickly returned to neutrality. You wonder briefly if this man is the origin of the message, or merely its voice, if he read your poem because he requested it, or because it was handed to him at the right moment, by the right handmaid, with the right expression. He sets down his cup and lifts a small, flat box from the floor beside him. Not lacquered, not ornate, just plain wood, with a small slip of fabric tied around it in a knot that speaks of careful fingers and no need for show. He places it on the table between you, not pushing it forward, not drawing attention. It sits there like a footnote. For your sleeve, he says. You do not answer. You do not ask permission to touch it. You wait. 5, maybe 6 breaths. Then gently you reach forward, lift it, weigh it in your hand. It is light, not empty, and emits no sound when moved. Whatever is inside does not clatter. You do not open it now. You only bow your head slightly enough to acknowledge the moment, not so much as to turn it into a promise. He rises. You do not. He does not speak again. He simply walks away back through the gauze curtain, which shifts slightly in his wake, not quite ready to fall still again. The servant does not return, which means you are expected to leave on your own, in your own time. This, too, is a message. You remain seated a while longer, one hand resting on the wooden box, your fingers tracing the edges of its tied fabric, not to untie it, but to learn its shape by touch. The tea cools beside you. Outside, the light has shifted again. The west wing always filters the sun in a peculiar way. You stand eventually, slowly, the box still cradled in your palm, and step back through the curtain into the hallway. The air there is heavier, as if holding in its breath, waiting to see whether you'll walk back the way you came, or take the path that veers left, the one that passes the Koi Bridge, and continues on toward. You take the left path. Of course you do. Not because it is shorter or more direct. Nothing important ever is. But because the curve it draws through the outer gardens provides a kind of privacy that isn't about solitude, but about plausible invisibility. The wooden box remains tucked in your sleeve, its edges no longer unfamiliar against your skin. You haven't opened it, and you won't not, yet not, while your steps are still being recorded by the geometry of the floorboards and the memories of passing maids who notice more than they reveal. The Koi Bridge appears ahead of you, arched, slightly painted red, so long ago that it has faded into a polite rust color, more suggestion than statement. The koi beneath it swim in leisurely arcs, unaware that they've become metaphors in dozens of poems, some of which were decent. One fish larger than the others, with a patch of white across its back that always makes it look surprised, breaks the surface momentarily, as if to check on your progress, then returns to the depths where the silt collects like forgotten conversations. You pause at the midpoint of the bridge, letting your gaze drift outward, not for effect, but because looking too directly at what just happened would make it real too quickly. The box is still warm from your hand. The gauze, the T, the statement for your sleeve. These details all circle each other in your memory, like threads waiting to be drawn into something more structured. The bridge's railing is smooth beneath your palm, worn by countless others who have leaned here in moments of in-between. You wonder how many of them carried unopened boxes. Too, how many stood just so, trying to decide which version of themselves to bring back across the wood. A breeze nudges your hair out of place, not enough to tangle, just enough to remind you that you're not a painting. On the other side of the bridge, a servant appears. Older than most, wearing a robe the color of faded persimmon. He carries nothing which is rare, and speaks only after bowing once, just deep enough to acknowledge your status, but not so deep as to disturb your contemplation. There is a gathering, he says, in the northern gallery. Not formal. The words are simple, but they carry a gentle tug. Not formal means it's still expected. Northern gallery means certain people will be there, likely seated in the corners, where their comments carry more weight, because they're spoken less often. You nod, not to confirm attendance, but to acknowledge the inevitability of your arrival. He steps aside. You proceed. The gravel path beyond the bridge is lined with tall grasses, and the occasional ceramic lantern, unlit, now their tops warmed by the sun, just beginning to express itself in earnest. A butterfly lands briefly on one, spreads its wings as if it's checking for messages, then departs. You follow the path around a bend that leads behind the eastern kitchens, a shortcut known mostly to the lower staff and those who once followed them there out of curiosity and didn't forget the way. A light clatter of pans filters through the back window, along with a smell that might be ginger or something trying to impersonate it. No one sees you. Or if they do, they see the idea of you. Someone walking with purpose. Robe neatly arranged, sleeves unwrinkled, expression neutral. You ascend the side steps of the northern wing, just as a trio of attendants exit, carrying folded fabrics and a tray of unused inkstones. One of them glances up, opens her mouth as if to greet you, then reconsiders, bows, and continues without speaking. Smart. The northern gallery is already alive with soft voices and rustling garments. Low tables have been arranged in a vaguely circular fashion, loose enough to encourage movement tight enough to discourage escape. A few ladies are seated already. 2 scribes, 1 court musician, and Lady Iko near the end, sipping from a bowl she cradles, like it contains either comfort or information. She sees you, acknowledges you, with an almost imperceptible dip of her fingers along the edge of her cup, and returns to her conversation with the musician, who appears to be trying not to smile too much at something she has just said. You choose a place not directly opposite, not directly beside, but within a few heartbeats' distance of everyone important. This takes practice. The seating here isn't assigned, but it is very much arranged. A page brings you tea without asking, which tells you your presence was assumed. The tray contains a small rice cake shaped like a ginkgo leaf, its edges too precise to eat without guilt. You leave it untouched for now, a silent signal of restraint. Conversations swell and taper around you. One woman describes a dream about a fox in a library. Another shares a half-remembered poem about wind against lacquered shutters. Someone recites a verse of your own poem, not the original, but a stylized version, already softened by retelling. You don't correct her. That would be impolite. The wooden box remains in your sleeve, heavier, now that the room has begun to settle around you, like mist. Lady Iko finishes her tea, sets down the bowl, and stands. Her departure is not sudden, but it causes a minor shift in the room's center of gravity. A few others follow. A servant enters shortly after holding a folded fan and a name not spoken aloud, and the page who brought your tea leans just slightly forward, not enough to speak, but enough to suggest something has changed. You rise, thank the room with a general bow that means everything and nothing, and step into the hallway just as the sun angles itself into a beam across the floor. Your shadow stretches ahead of you, long and narrow, leading toward the inner compound, the garden with the water bells, the library. No one visits unless summoned. And beyond that, you follow your shadow as it leads not urgently, but with the steady confidence of someone who knows that the next step is already waiting. The inner compound unfolds quietly around you, a shifting pattern of polished wood, moss-edged stone, and doorways designed more for suggestion than passage. The wooden box remains in your sleeve, unmoved and unopened, though its presence is now less of a question and more of a statement you haven't yet voiced. The path veers toward the garden, where the water bells rest hollow, stone vessels with narrow bamboo spouts above them that drip water one drop at a time, each impact creating a tone so delicate it seems intended only for the ears of people who never speak above a whisper. As you approach, You hear them begin, their music staggered like a melody remembered out of order. The garden is empty, or appears to be, but then again, this place is filled with spaces meant for the unseen, hollowed alcoves behind latticework, shadows shaped just slightly too sharply, footsteps held between breaths. You pause by the water bells and listen not just to the drops and their echoes, but to the sound of absence that folds itself around them. A breeze lifts the edge of your sleeve, not enough to reveal the box, just enough to remind you it is still there. You pass through the garden slowly, as though moving through a conversation you are not yet ready to join. Beyond the final bell, a gate stands slightly ajar, leading to the small courtyard before the library. The library is not marked, of course. Nothing here ever is. But you know it by its stillness, the way its roof slopes just a little lower than the others, as if bowing to the weight of all the pages it holds. The door opens with a sound like folded paper being turned too quickly. Inside, the air smells of camphor rice glue, and a patience so old it has grown roots. The walls are lined with scrolls, not labeled, but organized according to a system known only to the librarians, who do not speak unless spoken to, and even then often answer with gestures. One such librarian now appears from behind a curtain, nods at you as if continuing a conversation you never began, and turns to lead you deeper into the room. You follow. The floor here is slightly uneven, as if shaped by the accumulated weight of decades of careful steps. You pass a row of scrolls wrapped in faded red silk, another in pale blue, and arrive at a small alcove with a writing desk, a cushion, and a window that filters the afternoon light into slices. The librarian bows once more and departs, leaving you alone in a room that expects thought, but does not demand it. You sit. The wooden box is in your lap now. You untie the fabric slowly, not ceremonially, but as one might open a door already half closed. Inside is a small folded sheet of thick paper, the texture slightly irregular, handmade, not intended for everyday use. You unfold it. No letter, no poem, no names. Just an ink painting, simple and spare. A single ginkgo leaf, drifting downward, its stem curled, as if caught in the act of changing its mind. You study it, not for its technical quality, though it is fine, but for the meaning hidden in its simplicity. A ginkgo leaf, the same shape as the rice cake on your tray earlier. The same motif etched faintly into the lacquered edge of the tea table in the west wing. A pattern emerging, but not complete. You do not know what it means, not exactly, but you know enough to understand that meaning is intended, and that here is often more important than clarity. You fold the paper again, and return it to the box. Retie the cloth with a knot that does not match the original, and place it on the shelf beside you, where it joins a row of unrelated objects, each with their own half-told stories. The library does not mind. It has held stranger things. Outside the window, the sun has shifted again, lighting the tops of the hedges and casting long shadows across the stepping stones. You bow slightly to no one in particular and return to the corridor. Your steps are slower now, not from weariness, but because each turn seems filled with unspoken punctuation. A pause here, a comma there. You reach the courtyard as the bells begin again this time, in a new rhythm, as if acknowledging your return. A servant stands at the far end, not waiting just conveniently nearby. He carries a folded shawl and a fresh scroll wrapped in green silk. He does not meet your eyes, but he lifts the scroll slightly enough to imply its contents might be of interest. You nod. He hands it over with the deference of someone delivering either a confession or an invitation. You take it. The shawl remains with him. That was not for you. You do not open the scroll yet. Instead, you carry it tucked beside your sleeve, balanced now with the weight of the box, still soft against your arm. The scroll is warm from his hands. You walk slowly, turning toward the eastern wing, the one with the high lattice windows, and the jasmine trellis that catches the wind just enough to hum. The shadows stretch ahead of you, now leading you toward. The eastern wing does not announce itself, not in sound nor spectacle. It arrives gradually, like the scent of jasmine that precedes it, by several steps, sweet without apology. And entwined in the wooden lattice above where vines have been trained to grow, with such subtle control that they appear completely natural. The scroll in your sleeve rustles softly as you walk, not loudly, but just enough to remind you it has weight and, by extension, expectation. You do not open it here. That would be premature. The eastern walkway is meant for passing through, slowly pausing where light falls through the lattice in strips too delicate to disturb. The shadows move as you do stripes across the floor, like the pages of an unbound book waiting to be read by feet instead of eyes. The air grows warmer as you move deeper, touched by the sun just beginning to settle in its afternoon arc. It strikes the rice paper windows at a low angle, illuminating patterns not visible in the morning. Tiny irregularities in the paper threads that catch the light corners where dust has formed the softest constellation. You reach the end of the corridor and step into a small antechamber where a single vase of water holds a sprig of pine and one slightly wilted blossom possibly camellia, though the petals have begun curling at the edges in a way that makes them harder to identify. The effect is intentional. Nothing here is placed by accident, even the imperfection. You sit near the low table by the open screen door facing the garden, where the jasmine spills down over the edge of the stones. It is not a place for conversation. It is a place for consideration. So finally, you unroll the scroll. The green silk unwinds easily, revealing a short message. Not a poem, not quite a request, just a single brushstroke phrase written in a hand that feels familiar in its restraint. Return what was never taken. The ink is still faintly scented, floral and complex, as though whoever wrote it intended for your senses to finish the sentence. You read it again. Return what was never taken. You think of the box now sitting quietly among the other forgotten objects in the library. You think of the ginkgo leaf, of the rice cake, of the tea, of the way the gauze curtain swayed slightly after he passed through. You think of the pause between the poem and the reply. You think of waiting and how stillness can be mistaken for ownership. You roll the scroll again tighter this time and rest it beside the vase. You won't take it with you. It wasn't meant to be carried. A movement beyond the screen catches your eye, just the edge of a robe disappearing behind the garden's bamboo partition. Not toward you, not away from you, just across. Neither invitation nor retreat. You rise. The jasmine vines rustle faintly, touched by a breeze that you do not feel. You step into the garden, feet on stone, then gravel, then the earth beneath the cedar. The garden is more overgrown here, less curated, as if the hands that shaped it have chosen to pause and see what happens. You walk without urgency, following a narrow trail between brush and bamboo, until it delivers you to another corridor, older, more shaded, its wood darker from years of accumulated silence. This passageway leads behind the musician's gallery, a place usually filled with the faint sounds of string instruments and disciplined sighs. But now it is empty, as though the instruments themselves have excused their players for the afternoon. You pass beneath a paper lantern that hasn't been lit since the last festival. Its threadbare tassel sways slightly, brushing your shoulder. You do not react. The corridor ends at a door you have not opened before, or perhaps you have once and simply forgot. Either way, the handle is familiar in the way all worn wood becomes. You slide it aside. The room beyond is dim, not neglected, just quiet in a way that suggests it is waiting for a reason to be remembered. A window looks out onto a pond so still It reflects only the sky and none of the structure surrounding it. On a raised platform near the wall sits a stack of folded cloths and a low writing table. Nothing else. No books. No scrolls. Just a faint smell of cedar and something older. You step inside and let the door fall closed behind you, the sound no louder than a cough behind a fan. You sit on the cushion by the table, fingers resting lightly against the lacquered edge. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to clear the image. Then, after a long breath, you whisper the phrase aloud, not to the room, but to yourself. Return what was never taken. The words feel strange in your mouth. Not wrong, just different than on paper. You open your eyes again and glance around. Nothing stirs. You reach forward, open the drawer of the table, not expecting anything, and therefore perfectly prepared. Inside, another folded paper. Blank. But not empty. Not yet. You lift it carefully and place it on the table. Your brush is not with you. But beside the platform, tucked between two layers of fabric, is a case. You retrieve it. You open it. Inside a brush, an inkstone, and a tiny packet of chrysanthemum-scented powder. Not standard issue. Not for general use. You mix the ink slowly, letting each turn of the brush against the stone feel like a breath folded into color. The room waits. The page waits. You begin the stroke, not a poem, not a letter, a response, but not written in words. Instead, it begins with a single image drawn lightly, just enough to be seen in certain angles of light. A leaf, not ginkgo, but pine. Just one needle curling downward. You pause, ink still wet, and wait for the rest to. The pine needle dries slowly on the page, its ink absorbing unevenly into the fibers, like water pulled into sand. You sit back slightly, not enough to signal completion, but enough to let the page breathe. The scent of the chrysanthemum powder lingers in the air, a thin floral haze that hovers above the ink, like memory, reluctant to settle. You haven't drawn in years, not since your early instruction, when you were told your brushwork was too restrained to be expressive, and too expressive to be restrained. It was not criticism, but it did close a door. Yet here you are, returning to a practice that isn't quite yours, using a tool that feels familiar only because of its careful anonymity. You draw a second needle, bent slightly, touching the first at one end, like a sigh answered. Then a third, shorter, placed at an angle that breaks the pattern without disrupting it. 3 strokes. Not a tree, not a branch. Just the hint of something living, falling, maybe forgotten. You pause again. You aren't rushing because there is no destination. You are not being watched. At least, not directly. You know how that feels, and this is not it. This is something else, a kind of presence in the room, not physical, not imagined, but woven into the silence like a thread of silver, too fine to see, yet undeniable in its shimmer. You let the brush rest, not set down, just suspended. The window frames the pond, still unchanged, holding its mirror of the sky, with the same quiet confidence as before. A ripple appears, almost imperceptibly, then fades. Perhaps a fish, perhaps a breeze that didn't reach your cheek. You place the brush gently in the groove beside the stone and close the packet of powder. You won't need it again, not today. You let the image stand as it is. To add more would be explanation, and explanation would be a kind of surrender. You fold the paper carefully, in thirds the way letters are folded when they aren't meant to be read immediately. Then you wrap it in the cloth provided pale green, almost colorless in this light, and tie it with the same knot you used on the box, unremarkable and unspoken. You rise. The floorboards are cool again, even after the afternoon sun, and the smell of cedar has deepened into something sharper, more resinous. You carry the folded image back down the hall, retracing your path with deliberate slowness, as though leaving breadcrumbs for a thought you haven't finished thinking. At the threshold of the eastern wing, you pause. The jasmine is quieter now, the scent more grounded, the vines no longer restless. The light has turned softening the shadows into gentle pools that hide the edges of the corridor. You pass through them like moving through memory. There is a servant standing by the foot of the bridge, not the same one as before, but with the same bearing, still present, uncurious. He glances at the cloth in your hand, nods slightly, and turns toward the southern compound, without speaking. You follow. This part of the estate is older, the wood darker, the paper screens patched in places, with careful repairs made by hands that knew when not to match the grain too closely. You descend 2 steps into a hallway that smells of ink and rain, though it hasn't rained today. The walls are lined with poems written by names you recognize only vaguely, but you know their styles. The delicate curves of someone who preferred metaphor. The heavy lines of someone who thought mood should be imposed rather than suggested. At the end of the hall is a door. It is open. Inside a room, much like the one before. Simple, square, clean. A single table. No ink. No scrolls. Just a tray with an empty tea bowl and an envelope beside it. You step inside and place your folded paper on the table without unwrapping it. This is not delivery. This is return. The message said so. Return what was never taken. You do not look for approval. You do not wait for acknowledgement. You turn quietly and step back into the corridor. A breeze passes as you do, catching the hem of your sleeve and lifting it slightly, just enough to remind you that the fabric still carries the faint scent of that other room, the one where the tea was served, not for refreshment, but as an echo. You retrace your steps through the compound. You pass another servant, one you don't recognize, who glances once and then disappears behind a curtain, as though his purpose has been fulfilled by observation alone. You let yourself be seen. You let yourself disappear. Both actions are equal here. You return to your chamber. The lamp has been lit low and soft, casting the room in that early evening calm that makes everything look like it was painted hours ago and left to dry just in time for your return. A tray of water and fresh fruit sits untouched by the screen. A folded robe has been prepared, laid across the cushion with its sleeves arranged, as though it had once been worn by someone thoughtful. You remove the outer robe and slide into the one laid out for you, not because you're cold, but because the change of fabric signals a change of hour. Outside, the light is leaving slowly, with the patience of someone who does not need to be elsewhere. You sit. You breathe. You think of the pine needles, the ripple in the pond, the folded paper you left behind, which may never be opened or might already have been read by someone who sees not with eyes, but with the memory of ink. You think of the box, of the silence in the Western room, of the phrase, "Return what was never taken." You wonder how many such things you carry, folded and quiet, never yours, never fully given, just held until the room dims, not with haste, but with the slow certainty of time passing through a paper screen. You sit still, not in meditation, not in defiance of motion, but in a state of refined pause, an art well practiced among those who live by unspoken schedules. Outside, the chirring of insects begins faint and uneven at first, like a conversation restarting after an awkward silence. The fruit on the tray remains untouched. A plum sliced just slightly, askew a few cubes of cooled melon, one small dish of pickled lotus, root that glistens faintly in the lamplight. You consider it not because you are hungry, but because the presence of food asks something of the one who notices it. You reach for a piece of melon and let it rest on your tongue without biting. The flavor is subdued water and faint sweetness, like memory softened by time. You finish it, then let your hand rest again on your lap, the sleeve folding over itself like a breath taken and forgotten. The lamp flickers. Once, not enough to go out, just enough to suggest its oil is running low. You rise. Not urgently, but with the deliberate motion of someone who knows that leaving a room well is as important as entering one. The robe settles around your legs as you step toward the corridor. The hallway is darker now, but the kind of darkness that listens. Your footsteps are muffled by the matting, the walls quiet, in the way old wood becomes when it's absorbed enough years to stop creaking. You head east, not because you were told to, but because east is where answers usually wait when the sun has left. You pass 2 other chambers, both lit, both with voices, inside familiar ones, faintly melodic, debating incense types, or the merits of evening embroidery. You continue past them. The corner near the koi pond appears again, though the water is now nearly invisible, its surface reflecting only the moonlight and one floating lantern left drifting by someone with better timing than sense. You take the path to the right, the narrow one lined with stones that do not match. The moss between them is soft now, thick with the dampness that only evening can coax from the ground. Ahead, another door, this one slightly open, as if unsure whether to welcome or conceal. You slide it open further, with one hand, fingers curled lightly around the edge, palm relaxed. The room inside is small, smaller than expected. A single candle burns near the back wall, casting shadows that do not quite reach the corners. A figure sits at a low table. You recognize him not from his face, which remains half in shadow, but from the stillness of his posture, the way he holds his sleeve back from the cup as he pours tea, not for himself, but for the space across from him. You step forward. He gestures, not invitingly, not dismissively, just enough to indicate that the cup is yours if you wish to claim it. You do. Sitting slowly, you arrange your robe so that it neither touches the mat too eagerly nor avoids it too neatly. The tea is warm. Steam rises from it in spirals so small they could be mistaken for thoughts. Neither of you speaks. You drink the liquid quiet on your tongue, faintly herbal, slightly bitter at the edges. Not unpleasant. He sets the teapot down and rests both hands on the table, palms, flat fingers, barely spread. You returned it, he says. No question in his voice. Just acknowledgement. You nod. There is nothing to confirm. And did it remain unchanged, he asks. This time, the words are slower. Each one placed as if it might shift the balance of the room. You think of the pine needles, of the way the ink bled into the paper just slightly. No, you say, but it remained still. He seems to consider this. Then he lifts his hand not toward you, but toward a small box on the shelf behind him. Unremarkable in design, square, made of the same unpolished wood as the first. He doesn't hand it to you. He places it on the table between you and waits. You look at it. It doesn't move. Neither do you. You may open it, he says, and the words are less instruction than release. You untie the string simpler, this time knotted only once, and lift the lid. Inside a folded slip of paper and a comb. The paper is blank. The comb is carved from pale wood, maybe persimmon smooth and unused. You lift the comb gently. It's light, almost insubstantial, but cool in your hand. You set it beside the tea. The paper you do not unfold. Instead, you look at him. Is this a beginning, you ask? He lifts the teapot again, pours into your cup, and answers, without looking up. No. It is a continuation. You smile, just slightly, not because you understand, but because the shape of the moment asks for it. The candle flickers once, then steadies. You remain seated, neither leaning forward nor drawing back. He does the same. Outside, the insects hum louder, as if sensing that silence has found its center. The comb rests between you, quiet as breath. The blank paper curls slightly at the edge, its silence ready to be written upon, or not. You wait. He waits. The room does not. It stretches forward, carrying the tea, the candlelight, and the question that has not yet been asked. The candlelight breathes between you, unhurried and steady flickering, not from movement, but from the rhythm zoom of its own quiet life. The comb lies on the table like a word not yet spoken, its pale wood catching just enough glow to remind you it was meant to be noticed. The blank slip of paper, still folded, rests beside it, unassuming, and strangely heavier in presence than in weight. He doesn't move to explain either object, nor do you ask. Explanation has long since become a language beneath the one you are speaking. Now, a language not of grammar, but of gesture of what is chosen, and what is left unchosen. You lift the comb, not fully, just enough to turn it between your fingers. It is smooth and finely carved, but not delicate. It was made for use, not for show, which makes it unusual in a place where even whispers are curated. He watches not you exactly, but the comb as you hold it, as though he too is waiting to see what it means in your hand. Have you used this? You ask, and your voice is low-shaped to match the room. No, he replies. It has waited. You set it down again more carefully than before, not because it is fragile, but because your thoughts have begun to lean toward it with the kind of attention that folds time inward. The paper beside it seems more curious now, more expectant. You reach for it slowly, giving it the kind of regard one gives a sealed door. You unfold it. Inside, still nothing, at least nothing written in ink. But the paper is not blank. Upon closer look, you see faint creases along its surface, not from folding, but from pressure. Someone has pressed something against it. A comb, perhaps. Your fingers trace the indentations, a pattern of lines that curve and dip, not words, not symbols, but the suggestion of having once held something else. A print without a source. You hold the paper up to the candlelight. The ridges cast tiny shadows. They do not form a message, but they feel like one. He pours tea again, not because the cups are empty, but because the act fills the silence in a way that speech would only disturb. The scent of the brew is warmer this time, deeper, touched with something earthy, dried mushroom perhaps, or the underside of cedar bark. You sip. It grounds you. It remembers, he says softly, not as a revelation, but as an observation. You look again at the paper, then the comb, then the room. It does not feel as though you've entered a place so much as become part of its pattern. Is that its purpose, you ask? To remember. He tilts his head slightly. To carry forward what was never asked to be carried. You think of the box left in the library of the pine needle strokes, drawn in ink, that smelled of flowers, no longer in bloom. You think of the phrase, "Return what was never taken," and the strange weight of objects given in silence. You fold the paper again, not as tightly this time, and slide it back beside the comb. Then this isn't a gift, you say. Not exactly, he agrees, but it may become one. The candle dips low now, its base puddled with wax, the flame no longer steady, but curving as though leaning into sleep. You watch it, letting your breath slow, until it matches the rhythm of the room. Is this a farewell, you ask? Not because you are ready to leave, but because the hour suggests such things might soon be appropriate. Only if you choose to call it that, he answers. Not all departures require doors. You let that settle. The walls around you do not press close, but they do not recede either. The space is still and small and complete in the way quiet thoughts are when they no longer need explanation. You rise, adjusting your robe with the careful ease of someone who has sat long enough to earn the right to stand again. He remains seated, but nods once, not in dismissal, not in approval, just a soft punctuation to the moment's ending. You lift the comb. You do not pocket it, nor conceal it. You carry it plainly in your hand, a line of pale wood, balanced lightly across your fingers, as though it were a brush, not yet dipped in ink. The folded paper remains on the table. You do not need to carry both. As you step into the corridor again, the cool air greets you, like a page being turned. The floorboards beneath your feet remember your weight, creaking only once, and softly at that. The night outside is full now, deep and fragrant, with the kind of stillness that arrives only after everyone else has gone to sleep. You move through it carefully, not because you are afraid of waking someone, but because movement itself feels like a kind of writing now, and every step deserves thought. The comb remains in your palm, its ridges pressing gently into your skin. You consider returning to your chamber, to the lamp and the tray, and the quiet robe laid over the cushion. But your feet do not carry you there. Instead, you follow the long outer corridor, past the moon-viewing platform, past the empty alcove where the musicians once left a forgotten koto string, past the shuttered door with the blue silk tassel tied around its handle. At the end of the corridor, the night folds open into a narrow stairwell leading to the upper rooms, rarely used, dimly lit, and not meant for sleep. You ascend, slowly, silently, the comb in your hand, the question on your breath. And above you, the stairs unfold in half steps, narrow and steep, as if uncertain whether they are meant to be climbed or simply admired from below. The wood is older here, worn smooth in places where footsteps have polished its grain into a memory of motion. You place each foot carefully, not for fear of noise. This part of the compound listens without judgment, but because there is a difference between passing through and being allowed to arrive. The comb remains in your hand, cradled now, rather than carried, as though it has begun to teach your fingers how to hold it. At the top of the stair, a door stands ajar. Not open, not closed, just enough for possibility to pass through. The light beyond it is faint, tinged with amber, as if from a lantern whose wick has not been trimmed in some time. You push the door open without sound. The room beyond is unfamiliar, though it feels known. It is small, almost square, with a window that does not frame a view so much as hold the night outside at bay. The walls are bare, save for a single scroll rolled up and resting on a shelf. No title, no ribbon, just paper, waiting to be asked something. A low table sits at the center, unadorned, and beside it, a cushion that looks recently used, though no heat remains in the fabric. You step inside and close the door behind you, not with finality, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has stepped out of the corridor and into an idea. The comb is set gently on the table, its ridges catching the low light, casting shadows across the grain of the wood that resemble brush strokes waiting for ink. You do not sit yet. Instead, you cross to the window. Outside, the compound lies quiet, its rooftops tiled in silver by moonlight. From here, you can see the edge of the water garden, the tops of the outer trees, the faint suggestion of the distant bell tower, whose chime is heard more in memory than in timing. You open the window a fraction. The air slips in cool and laced with cedar and something older, something that smells like pages, left undisturbed for years. You return to the table. Sit. The cushion gives beneath you with the sigh of old fabric. The comb waits. Your hands rest on your knees, not fidgeting, not still, simply present. A sound emerges, not from the room, but from beneath it. A creak. A step. Not purposeful, not accidental. Then another. You do not move. Someone is approaching, not quickly, not hesitantly. The door opens not wide, just enough for a shadow to precede the figure who follows it in. She is older, not elderly, but with the kind of age that comes from knowledge worn comfortably, like soft silk. Her robe is plain, the color of riverstone, her hair gathered back without ornament. She steps inside, bows slightly, not low, not perfunctory, but like someone acknowledging a custom without needing to perform it. She looks at the comb, then at you. Then, slowly, she sits across the table, her hands folding in her lap like leaves settling on water. The silence stretches, not uncomfortably, just enough to let the space shape itself around the moment. You brought it, she says, and her voice is dry and even, like the first page of a book that hasn't been opened in years. You nod. There is no reason to pretend otherwise. And did it speak to you? She asks. The question is not a test, more like an inventory. You pause. Not in words, you say, but I heard it. She inclines her head. Not quite approval. Something gentler. That is how it begins, she says. Her eyes rest on the comb. It belonged to no one, but many held it. It remembers more hands than names. You glance at it now. It does look like something that would accumulate the memory of touch, not stories, just presence. And now you ask, does it belong to me? She lifts her hands, turns them palm up, as if to say, belonging is not the point. It is with you, she replies. That is enough. You wait. She says nothing further, and yet you feel the conversation shifting. She is not here to instruct you, not to explain the comb, or the scrolls, or the shadows that pass between certain rooms at certain hours. She is here because you are here, and that is all that was required. May I ask your name? You say the words polite, not pressing. She smiles, the corners of her mouth creasing like well-folded paper. You may, she answers, but she does not give it, not yet. Instead, she reaches into her sleeve and produces a folded square of cloth. It is old, worn, faded from use. She sets it on the table beside the comb, and the two objects do not touch, but they echo one another. When it's time, she says, you will know what to do with it. Then she rises, bows again. This time, lower, not to you, but to the moment. She leaves without another word. The door slides closed behind her with the gentleness of understanding. You are alone again. The comb, the cloth, the low light, and beyond the window, the sky turning faintly, just faintly toward. The cloth remains on the table, beside the comb, the two of them lying there, like parallel verses in a poem written in a language that asks not to be translated. You do not reach for either yet. Instead, you sit and let the room gather itself around your stillness. Outside the window, the sky has not yet lightened, but something in the air has changed, something quiet and anticipatory, like the hush before a sentence you already know the shape of. The candle flickers again, its wick now curved and slightly blackened, casting long, narrow shadows that stretch away from the center of the table as though they too are listening. You glance once more at the cloth. It is soft looking, but worn, faded around the edges, the way cloth becomes after it has been folded and unfolded too many times by hands that were not always careful. The dye, once perhaps deep blue, has softened into the gray of memory. A simple square, no embroidery, no embellishment. But the corners hold themselves with the dignity of something that has been asked to remain intact despite being forgotten. You lift it slowly, letting it drape across both palms. It is lighter than you expect, lighter even than the comb, and carries no scent, only the neutrality of time. Holding it, you wonder how many hands have done the same, folded, smoothed, tucked into sleeves, left on tables. It doesn't resist you, nor does it yield. It simply remains. You lay it flat on the table. Beneath the soft folds, there is a faint crease, a line suggesting it was once wrapped around something not entirely square. You trace it lightly with your fingertip. There's no residue, no imprint, but the shape lingers, all the same. A rectangle, long and narrow, like the shape of a brush case, or a flute, or a letter never sent. You fold it again, not precisely, but respectfully. Once, then again, letting the fabric fall into itself without forcing it. You set it aside, not away. The comb remains where it was, its pale body resting like the spine of a small animal, delicate but assured. You pick it up now. You run your thumb gently along the teeth, feeling for breaks, for wear. None. Perfectly smooth, as if it had been made for hands that do not age. You place the cloth beside it, once more, the two forming a quiet alignment. A sound from the corridor, soft steps, not hurried, not tentative. The door remains closed, the silence on the other side more companionable than empty. Whoever it is does not knock. They wait. You stand. Not abruptly, just enough to suggest you were going to anyway. You open the door. A young girl stands there, no older than 13, wearing a robe that is slightly too long in the sleeves and clearly borrowed. She holds a scroll in her hands, not sealed, not new. She bows quickly, with more enthusiasm than accuracy, and holds the scroll out with both hands. You take it gently, careful not to let your fingers brush hers. She bows again and retreats down the hall without waiting to be dismissed, the robe sleeves trailing behind her like the tail of a startled bird. You close the door. The scroll is familiar, in weight, slightly warped at the ends, as if it had been stored too near a damp wall. You unroll it carefully. Inside a poem, inked in a hand you recognize now, though you still do not know the name. You read it aloud, softly, to the room. What is forgotten waits not in silence, but sings in the sleeve's shadow. You read it again. The words aren't instructions. They aren't revelation. They are context. The comb, the cloth, the paper, the hands, the weight of waiting. You roll the scroll again and set it beside the candle. The candle, for its part, has grown short now, its base wide and soft with melted wax. You watch it a moment longer before blowing it out with a gentle breath. The room is not go dark, not fully. The sky beyond the window has begun to soften, not quite light, not quite blue, just the early smudge of approaching dawn. You sit again, the comb in your lap, the cloth beside you, the scroll between them. You are not sure if this is arrival or delay. You are not sure it matters. A breath, then another. From the window, a breeze drifts in, not scented, not cool, just air moving as it always does when night begins to loosen its grip. In the corridor, beyond the door, a chime sounds. Not from a bell, but from a cup set gently on wood. Someone has left something again. You do not rise, not yet. The comb's teeth press gently against your palm. The cloth rests against your knee. The sky lightens. You wait not for an answer, but for the next line, the next movement, the next small invitation that always comes, always gently, when you are just beginning to. When you finally stand, the air feels different, not simply cooler, but thinner, as though the room has gently exhaled while you were sitting still. The candle is out. The window is still open. The sky beyond has taken on that pale, uncertain shade that exists only in the moment before morning fully declares itself. You step to the door, pause, and then open it, slowly, expecting the quiet to greet you. It does. The hallway is empty, but at your feet, resting on the worn wood of the threshold, sits a small teacup, perfectly centered on a folded square of paper. The cup is simple ceramic, with a crackled glaze, the sort often kept for personal use rather than display. The tea inside has cooled no longer, steaming, but still fragrant, a blend faintly floral, faintly bitter, like a memory that insists on both sweetness and regret. You kneel slowly, legs stiff from the stillness of earlier, and lift the cup. Beneath it, the folded paper holds its shape neatly. Not stiff, not damp. It was placed with care. You unfold it and read, "When the comb is drawn, begin." That's all. 5 words. No name, no mark. Just ink slightly faded at the edges, as though written with a brush that had already said too much. You read it again aloud, this time your voice barely rising above the whisper of wind brushing the outer screen. When the comb is drawn, begin. The sentence lingers in the air as you sip the tea. Cool now. The flavor is sharper, more defined. You taste something like chrysanthemum again, but drier, like petals after sun. there is also ginger barely there, just enough to clear the edge of your breath. You finish the cup in silence, the way one finishes a letter they never received, but somehow knew by heart. You stand cup in one hand, paper in the other, and re-enter the room. The comb still rests where you placed it, and beside it, the cloth folded now by your own hands, but somehow taking on the posture of something waiting to be unfolded again. You place the empty cup on the windowsill, where the early light touches it, making its glaze seem newer than it is. The paper you fold again and slide beneath the comb. Then you take both in hand, not like before, not carrying, not examining, but holding, as though ready. You wrap the cloth loosely around the comb, letting the fabric drape, not concealing, but softening. You don't know where you're going yet, but you step out into the corridor, and your feet seem to decide for you. Past the moon-viewing platform, again, past the lantern, whose tassel never moved all night, past the little side door that hasn't been opened since spring. Each step feels familiar, though this path is slightly different from before. You notice things, small things, a thread of silk caught in a splintered beam, the faded petal of a camellia at the base of a column, the faint scent of someone's perfume lingering near a door that's just barely closed. Then you reach a garden gate, one of the older ones. You've passed it before, always closed, the kind of place you assumed led to storage or disuse. Today it's open, just a little. You push it the rest of the way and step through. The garden beyond is small, contained by tall bamboo fencing and dense evergreen shrubs, creating a space that feels wrapped more than walled. A single stone path curves gently through the moss toward a pavilion at the far end, modest, with a sloped roof and weathered railings, built not to impress, but to witness. You follow the path. A breeze passes, once enough to lift your sleeve, to rustle the cloth around the comb. You keep walking. The pavilion has no door, just an open frame with sliding panels that have long since been removed. Inside, a bench runs along one wall, and above it, a scroll hangs. You recognize the hand, the same brushwork that gave you the poem, that folded meaning into silence, that let blank paper speak. But this time, the ink says only, to see again what has not changed. You sit. The comb rests in your lap now, still wrapped, but no longer waiting. You take a breath, then another, and then, slowly, carefully, you begin to unwrap the cloth. The morning is quiet, but not empty. The light filters through the lattice like brush strokes of gold across pale wood. The comb lies in your hand again unchanged. But the way you hold it has shifted. You lift it. The teeth glint once. You draw it through your hair. Not once. Twice. Slowly. As though each movement matters. And then the third stroke glides more easily than the first two, as if the comb now recognizes the motion, as if the air around you has softened just slightly in approval. The sound it makes is almost imperceptible, a whisper of wood against strands of memory, brushing memory of gesture, passing gently through the edges of thought. You pause, the comb still in hand, resting now against your temple. The pavilion holds its breath with you. The scroll behind you, silent but present, as if it too is listening. Light pours in from the side, the morning sun finally slipping over the fence and touching the floor in a broad, slow stroke. There is a warmth in it that wasn't there moments ago, and the cloth now pooled beside you on the bench catches the gold like an old friend being remembered. You glance down at the comb. The pale wood gleams faintly where your fingers have touched it. There is nothing dramatic in its appearance, no inscription, no special mark. But something has shifted, not in the comb itself, but in its having been drawn. You place it gently on your lap and close your eyes, not to retreat, but to feel the moment without looking directly at it. Behind your lids, images unfurl without urgency, the shape of the blank paper pressed with ridges, the folded cloth's quiet insistence, the phrase written and spoken, both, when the comb is drawn, begin. You consider what that might mean, not in theory, but in this exact space, in this breath, in this hour, where the birds have not yet begun their louder calls. You open your eyes and look around the pavilion again. Nothing has changed, and yet everything feels newly placed. The scroll behind you remains still the path through the garden, silent. But your place within these things feels suddenly intentional. You stand. The comb you tuck into your sleeve, not hidden, just held. The cloth you fold again slowly, its fibers now warmed by the sun, its creases softened by having once wrapped purpose. You leave the pavilion with the care one gives to a room that might remember footsteps. Back through the garden, down the curve of the stone path, past the first tiny weed, emerging between moss tiles, as though offering a suggestion. The gate, still open, swings slightly in the morning breeze, its hinges sighing rather than creaking. You step through and gently close it behind you. The compound is awake now, but only just. A few birds call uncertainly. Somewhere, someone slides open a screen with a practiced hand. You pass no one. Or perhaps you do, and they do not greet you, because this is not a time for greetings. You return toward the main hall, not directly, but by way of the lesser corridor, the one where sound behaves oddly, where even footsteps become muted, like thoughts not quite spoken aloud. The sleeves of your robe move quietly with each step, the comb pressing lightly against your arm, as if reminding you of its presence. You reach the corner where the corridor bends sharply around the base of the small shrine. A familiar scent catches you incense, but not fresh. The fading remnants of a stick burned sometime in the night. You pause there, not for reverence, not for ritual, but because the air feels like it has something to say. You tilt your head and listen. Nothing speaks. Still you bow slightly, just once. Then continue. The light through the high lattice work dapples the floor in half-formed patterns that look just briefly like writing in a script you almost recognize. You don't stop to decipher. You arrive at the room just beyond the inner courtyard. You've been here before, though not often. Its screens are always partially drawn, its corners often shaded. You slide the door open. Inside another low table, another scroll. This one already unrolled. A figure sits beside it. Not the man from the night before. Not the woman with the cloth. Someone younger, unfamiliar, with an expression that does not search, but waits. They look at you and nod once, then gesture to the space across from them. You sit. The table between you holds two objects, a bowl of water with a single floating camellia petal and a narrow wooden case. The case has no latch, no lock, just a small indentation along the side, a place for a thumb. You do not touch it. Not yet. The person across from you says nothing. Their silence is full, not empty. You glance at the bowl. The camellia petal turns slowly in the water, pushed by currents too small to see. You lift your eyes again. The figure watches, but does not instruct. You reach forward. The comb is still tucked in your sleeve. You draw it again, not through your hair this time, but across your open palm, as if reawakening the memory of having held it. You place it on the table. Then you rest both hands beside it, palms down. The figure opens the wooden case. Inside a brush, an inkstone, and a page, blank, but not unfamiliar. You lean forward slightly, breath steady. Your hand lifts, and your hand lifts, not with haste, not with uncertainty, but with the careful deliberation of someone who has walked through enough doors, held enough folded cloth, and tasted enough cooled tea to understand that beginnings are not abrupt. The brush, lying quietly in its case, waits without insistence. You reach for it. The bristles are soft-shaped into a fine point, the kind favored by those who trust nuance more than boldness. You dip the brush into the water first, not for ink, but to ready it, to remind it how to move. Then, with a quiet patience that matches the room's breath, you run the brush over the inkstone. The movements small, steady. The ink pools slowly, dark and smooth, and the scent of it rises faintly, soft smoke, old paper, something earthy beneath. Across from you, the figure does not speak. They fold their hands in their lap and wait their gaze, not on the brush, not on your face, but somewhere in the space between the two, where meaning often sits before choosing its form. The page lies before you, blank still, but heavy with potential. Not pressure, just invitation. You let the brush hover above the surface. Then you begin. The first stroke is curved, slight, deliberate, not part of a character, not an image, but the memory of motion. It resembles the first pine needle you painted in the room near the pond, except this one leans slightly more to the left, as though time has taught it something. The ink dries as you lift the brush and begin another. You do not plan. You do not decide. The strokes arrive like footsteps down a corridor you've never seen but recognize. They do not form words, not yet, but they shape something nonetheless. You pause. Let the ink settle. Let the silence respond. The page now holds 5 strokes, simple, separate, yet linked by an invisible thread. Across from you, the figure leans forward slightly, then unfolds a second sheet of paper, placing it beside yours. They pick up the brush from their own side of the case, already prepared, and begin to write, not over your strokes, not in answer, but in parallel. Their hand is steady, the brush strokes fluid. You watch them without needing to understand. The ink glistens before it dries, catching the early morning light in a way that makes it seem briefly alive. They pause after the third stroke, glance at you, then nod. It is not a signal. It is not a question. It is simply a moment shared. You continue. The next mark you make is more vertical, drawn with a slower hand. The brush pulls slightly at the page, a sound so faint you hear it more in your fingers than in your ears. With each line, each gesture, the space between you and the figure becomes less defined, not by closeness, but by shared rhythm. There is no speaking. There is no agreement. But the paper fills nonetheless. You glance occasionally at their page. Their strokes are longer, more continuous, as if written in a single breath. Yours are quieter, broken by moments of pause, of listening. Together, the two pages do not match, but they belong. When the ink begins to dry on your brush, you dip it again, this time more confidently. The bristles darken once more ready. You draw a shape, now, not a letter, not a picture, but something between the two. It looks like the curve of a sleeve caught in wind. It looks like the edge of a comb. It looks like the start of a story. The figure sets down their brush. You do not. Not yet. You finish the shape. Then one more. A final mark. No flourish, no signature. Just a soft line that folds the others together. You lift the brush and rest it across the stone. The page before you holds not a message, but a map. A map, not to a place, but to a moment. The figure nods again, this time lower. Then they take both sheets and slide them together, edge to edge, not overlapping, but touching. The ink does not smudge. The paper aligns. You watch, and in that stillness, you realize you are no longer observing, but becoming. They fold both pages, once, then again, then wrap them in the same cloth that once held the comb. It is no longer just cloth now. It has become something else, something held, something given. They place the wrapped bundle on the table between you. You do not reach for it. Not yet. Instead, you bow slightly, and they return the bow. Then, slowly, the figure rises. They leave the room without a sound, their presence dissolving into the morning like ink into water. You are alone again. The room breathes around you. The wrapped pages rest beside the brush. Outside, a bird calls, once clear high, then gone. You reach for the cloth. You lift it. And just as your fingers close around it, the cloth feels different than before. Not heavier, not lighter, but more distinct, as though it now holds not only paper and ink, but the imprint of something quieter, shared. Breath, paused, thoughts. The soft edge of understanding reached without need for words. You lift the bundle, tucking it again into your sleeve, where the comb once rested, where small things have a way of lingering until they become part of you. The brush remains on the table, drying in a shallow pool of ink that has begun to fade at its edges. You look at it for a moment longer, then turn toward the doorway. The corridor outside is brighter now, touched fully by day, though the compound still holds a hush, as if it too is reflecting, letting the light enter slowly. You move through the hall with a different kind of stillness now. Not cautious, not measured, but integrated. Familiar faces pass you, some bowing slightly, some glancing, and continuing on. They do not ask where you have been. They do not ask what you carry. That is not how things are done here. You pass through the courtyard where the stones are warm underfoot. A gardener pauses, wiping his hands on a cloth that looks not unlike the one in your sleeve. You nod. He nods. Nothing more is needed. Near the eastern wing, the jasmine vines have begun to droop from the morning sun, their scent softer, now mingling with the heat rising off the stones. You pause by the lattice, letting the dappled shadows play across your robe. The scroll you left in the smaller room has likely been taken by now. Read or not, you cannot know. But its absence or presence no longer feels like the question. You continue on toward the library, not for study, not to read, but because it feels today like a place where arrivals happen slowly. You enter through the smaller side door, the one used by those who do not wish to be announced. Inside, the light is slanting across the floor, catching the edges of stacked scrolls and the uneven spines of books with names that have faded past legibility. You move between the shelves without looking at titles. Your steps guide you. Your memory follows. The box. You remember where it sat. Whether it is still there does not matter. You reach the shelf. It is gone. A slight indentation remains, as if the wood is still recalling its presence. You place your hand over the space, not to claim it, not to question, just to acknowledge. Then you turn. A low table near the far window is empty, save for a single sheet of paper folded once and weighted with a stone. You lift the stone. The paper does not curl. You open it. Inside, some things are returned not to where they began, but to where they might continue. There is no signature. There never is. You fold the paper again, place it back where it was, replace the stone. Then you take a seat, not to wait, not to write, just to let the room receive your stillness. The bundle in your sleeve shifts slightly, reminding you that its presence is meant to be carried, not forever, perhaps, but long enough to understand why it came to you in the first place. The library breathes around you, pages shuffling in the windless silence, wood settling like a sigh. Outside the garden wall casts a longer shadow now. Somewhere distant, but familiar, a bell chimes. Once, twice, then quiet. You sit a while longer, And then,